Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk.
Hello! Someday we should record our warm-ups. Our vocalization warm-ups.
Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody at all.
Somebody might. But it's a very small...
I mean, if they really want it, they can write to us and we will send them a little individual MP3.
Yes, we will do that for our fans.
Of nonsense.
Yes, of me doing vocal warm-ups. Because I am just as tone deaf as you think. No, I'm probably more tone deaf than you think.
Wow. That's really tone... No, I'm just kidding. You opened it up and I had to do it.
Yes,
I had to step into there.
When I lob them, you have to hit them back.
We were just talking about the blog ass since Jenny Lawson's. I'm sure somebody out there has listened to her, and I'm finally reading her first book, despite following her blog for ages in the heyday of blogging. It's kind of died, but not completely, because we have a community. But yes, very funny stuff. Also, I could play a drinking game to the number of times she says vagina in the book. In fact, there's a whole part. I have to read it to my husband. But there's a whole part where they're arguing and she felt he was being sexist. And then she was like, I feel he just didn't want to argue with my vagina anymore, which is smart because my vagina is wily.
You know what? I'm going to go home now and have to find that.
I feel like it's a quick read.
And read it again.
Yeah. It's good stuff. But she is out crazy. She knows that she has mental...
Oh, yeah. She's very open about it.
Health issues. And so she embraces that and goes with it. And she has even less filter than we do.
Which you can believe it.
Amazing. And so everything just spills out of her face. Because she worked in HR. And there's this whole thing about how she was talking. So a dude said to her, I read this part last night. It was work colleague, and they're having lunch together. And he's talking about this woman who was he said, flat on the top and then badonk on the bottom. And she was like, I bet she had a huge labia then. And he was like, what? And then she just kept going. And then she was like, I don't know what he was saying anymore, because in my head I was picturing it and I thought it would probably be a great lap warmer. And she just goes out to these bizarre places. And somehow it comes around in the conversation, her going, no, mine's not quite large, but I do well for myself. And he's like, you're not supposed to talk to me about your labia at lunch.
Or, I don't know, ever.
And instead of thinking you're HR, and this is technically at this point probably sexual harassment. If you
it is unwelcome.
He doesn't want to hear about your labia or the big meaty labia you're describing on this other woman.
That you don't know. She
was like, I bet she has to pin it up. Good times. Highly recommend it. It's called Let's Pretend This Never Happened, a mostly true memoir.
I had lunch with a group of people recently, all women except for one man. And of course, the conversation turned to where our boobs are going and how fast or slow. And somebody was saying how, well, I can just get rid of mine. They aren't doing me any good anymore. And I said, yeah, mine don't get me free drinks anymore. Right. And a couple of them looked at me and went, how did your boobs get you free drinks? And I'm like, I don't know where you were hanging out. But
Yeah. Free a lot of things, frankly.
Then it turned to, yeah, there are no handstands in my future. I would smother. Or I'd be blinded. And one of them was like, yeah, I can't run. And I'm thinking to myself,
Dolly Parton joke.
That's why you don't run.
Yeah, that's the reason.
And I said, they make these things called sports bras.
Shh, don't tell me reasons I should have
marvelous.
Are they?
No, they're not. But okay. If you're very well endowed, they are marvelous because they hold things in place so they don't bobble about and hurt you.
Bobble. I pressed it bobbly down the stairs instead of boobly. Well, that took a dark turn. So I just remember as a kid there were Dolly Parton jokes.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was like, one was a picture one, and it was her behind a tree. I'm sure somebody saw that. All you can see is boobs. And then the other one was, why did Dolly Parton have two black eyes or something like that? I don't remember. It was like elementary school, middle school jokes. And of course it was because she went for a jog. Just made me think of that.
I love
new
Dolly Parton, admiration for Dolly Parton because I learned, I mean, we all love her. She's an American goddess.
Yeah.
She has her mic pack. She has a pocket sewn into her wigs. And that's where her mic goes because there's no place to pin it to her clothes. And she's like, so I'm always going to wear wigs. I just tell them, put the pocket in
read
there.
her comment. I loved it. She was like, she is the most out about plastic surgery of like anybody who isn't weirdly addicted to it.
But she hasn't had her lips blown up like tires.
Well, that's just not one she was interested in, I suppose. Not everybody wants tire lips.
I watched the inductions to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just so I could see her be inducted.
Right.
It was worth it.
Yeah. I'm surprised that she hasn't had a breast reduction because of her back at this point.
She's the tiniest little, maybe they're filled with helium. Think about it.
I don't know. Even my grandma was like, no. And she got those puppies reduced.
But she is.
And she by that time already had permanent divots, so it didn't matter.
But Dolly Parton she's such a tiny little woman.
So like, nope. I was going to say like, I was going to go all into like, at some point you get weaker. And I'm like, how do you carry those at that point? When you're already like, you see little old ladies who are stooped over right. And they have like B cups, you know, like how do you do that? Eventually they'll weigh more than the rest of her body all put together.
I'm sticking with my helium theory.
It would be handy. It would straighten your back. It would be so great for your spine. You just hear the pop, pop, pop when you stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, I need that so bad. I'm ready to go get helium implants. I feel like, though, that doesn't work. You'd have to repump them every day with helium because just like a balloon, it's a gas that goes and it would filter out.
I don't know. Aren't those things sealed? Aren't implants sealed?
For liquids, not for gases. That's a whole different level of permeation. Well, let's talk science now.
Why bring
I'm going to pretend that I know exactly what I'm talking about. Who knows how porous they are to a gaseous substance?
I cannot answer that.
And helium is very light.
The only person I know who has a fake boob, well, I probably know more than one person, but who had a mastectomy on one side and so has a fake boob. She's very excited because she found out if you get cremated, it explodes.
That's awesome. Go out as a bomb.
So I'm like, we have to find some way for the doctor to go in and put glitter or gunpowder.
I feel like you probably have to do that in the beginning.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
You gotta think about these things in advance. You gotta pre-plan. So anybody getting new breast implants, we would like you to request glitter. Thank you.
Yes.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you for coming.
I actually know several people with breast implants.
I probably do, and I just am not.
I know one person got them removed because it was leaking, and it has caused her so many, like a horror story's worth of problems ongoing. So she had to get those removed. But yes, I know several, and because I was on a mom's board, and several of them were on that mom's board, and then like they had to talk. They were like, I didn't think I'd be able to breastfeed because they got them before they had kids, but it doesn't mess anything like that up. So you can still breastfeed.
I have no idea. So.
Yeah. Still do it. It's fine. All the ducks are still there.
Many ducks.
All right. So I watched on Shudder an old giallo film. Like it's a subgenre of horror, basically Italian giallo films.
Oh, okay.
It was made in 1986. I should have looked up the year. I should have looked up the script. But I covered, if you remember, someone called Il Mostro de Firenze, right? The monster of Firenze, whatever this was, in Italy. And he was the one who was killing people in parked cars. Kind of like the Zodiac Killer, but he kind of kept going with that. And so I'm watching this movie, and I started. It didn't say anything about being based on anything. I'm watching it, and at the very beginning, of course, there's a couple making out in the car and they get shot, and I was all, ooh, super original. Like, there's not a million movies like that. And I was doing something else like I always am, and then he goes over and he breaks off a bit of grapevine, and then he shoves it right up there.
Oh.
Right? Well, I went, wait. Wait. Because that is what this real serial killer does. So then I'm paying attention because I'm like, is this him? It is an Italian movie after all. And this was in Italy that this happened. And sure enough, something else happens. And I was like, it's exactly what happened in the real life stuff. They actually kept very close that they actually went with there was a couple, and after he shot into the car, the guy had been able to slam on the gas and reverse across the street, but then he fell down into it. He had been shot in his defense. And he kind of went back into this ditch and he couldn't get out, and the guy came and finished him off, and they had that scene in there. So it was very accurate. And anyway, it was centered around this woman. She thought it was her boyfriend at first, and she suspected that he was involved with this. And so she's just fascinated by it because she works in... What was there? I don't know. I watched a bunch of Giallo films. And now they've loaded like 10 of them on Shudder. Now they're starting to blend together. I call them boobs and blood. That's the genre, is boobs and blood. Giallo is all about violence against women. So, not the best, but it was like 70s, 80s Italian films.
Right.
And very stylistic and stuff like that. But anyway, that was fun. I was like, yay! I covered that story, and they made a whole movie about it. It was called The Killer Is Still Out There.
Ooh.
Because, of course, they never caught him. They had the false arrest. They had everything. So awesome.
Did you watch the movie that Becky Clark recommended to you?
Yeah, I've seen it before. Rare Exports.
Yes. What was it called?
Rare Exports, I think.
Is it good? Because I was like, oh, that looks good. I want it.
Yeah, it's a really good one, but it's not one that you can frequently find places. But if there is a time, it would be now, because it is a Christmas movie.
I'm going to look for it.
Yeah. It's like an evil... What is it? Oh, shoot. Norway, Iceland, I don't remember where it's at. It's one of those types of places,
it's one of those
or
very
Scandinavian
cold places.
country, and it's a whole bad Santa type of thing, but different than what you've seen.
Not before. A funny, sweary bad Santa. A pluck your eyeballs out and eat the bad Santa.
Yeah. Yeah.
A worser Santa.
I've, of course, been watching a ton of... It's funny because Christmas depresses me, and that will never change. My husband loves Christmas. I try not to be a kill sport, but I do have the you don't get to decorate till after Thanksgiving rule. So Black Friday is when it starts. It is, and it's fine. But I love Christmas horror. Just like I'm a total, I don't like the term atheist, but whatever. That's the best. It's the easiest for me to use right now. And yet I love religious horror. Mm-hmm. So strange. But I love Christmas horror. So the second we got past Thanksgiving, I was like, I'm going to watch all the Christmas horror. So I've already watched the 2 remakes of Black Christmas, but I have to go find the original Black Christmas because for whatever reason it's not on there, and it's the good one. But and I watched a new one called Christmas, Bloody Christmas. That was indeed a bloody Christmas.
Have you seen the one with the guy from Stranger Things?
Oh no, I haven't gone to the movie theater yet.
Is it in the theater now? Mm-hmm. Maybe we should go.
Yeah, Sierra wants to go. So we have to take my sister.
We can do that.
But Joe Bob was on last night.
Yes.
And he played one I hadn't seen before. I had seen the anthology film that he did. The other one was, it was so confusing. And I'd noticed at the beginning that it said some scenes written and directed by. And I was like, I wonder what happened there. Because I've never seen it called out separately, even when a director's replaced, right? They usually just remove their name because they're pissy at them about something. Mm-hmm. But no, it's like, some scenes done by this. And so you're watching and you're like, do you hate women or do you hate Santa? Which one is it?
I'm sure there's a fair number of people who hate both.
It was terribly written. Even Joe Bob was like, He had some things to say about the filming and the acting.
Oh.
So, yeah. But
well,
now I don't remember what it was called. So it doesn't matter anyway. But yes, 'tis the season.
It is. Of course, by the time people are listening to this, we'll be a little past the season.
It is. 'Tis past the season. 'Tis the paying off the season.
Yes.
But I haven't watched Die Hard yet, so.
I haven't either.
I'm going to have to do that.
Yep.
Just to piss people off, honestly. Same reason I talk about the fact that Jack could have fit on the door in Titanic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Trading Places. is a Christmas movie.
That's true. I haven't watched that one in a long time. I like it. It's just not like in my top 5 billion. I don't know. I don't know what my top 20. We'll just say
top
that.
5 billion.
I don't know.
Shall we begin?
Yes.
So what are you going to talk about this week?
Do you enjoy going to the grocery store? If so, this message is not for you. But if you're like me and procrastinate going to the store, Instacart is a fantastic option to ensure you no longer have to. Save yourself a trip and go through Instacart, where you can get a delivery through a personal shopper in as little as 1 hour. My experiences have been great so far, with my personal shopper texting me before substituting another product, letting me know when they were on their way to my house, and letting me know it had been delivered, all via text. If you click on our affiliate link in the show notes or on our website, you get free delivery on your first order over $35, and you help out our show at the same time. It's the perfect time to give it a try. Okay, I have a twofer. I have a double feature.
Ooh.
Which meant, because one of them was pretty short and the other one I had to condense, but it's so popular that I decided, I will condense it. Because I have new stuff on it and I'm super excited about it. Okay, so I'm calling this one Paper Trails, and you'll just have to wait and see what each story is about. Okay. On June 30th, 1999, the body of a man was found in a cornfield near West Alton, Missouri. So many cornfields lately.
Yeah.
The field was off a side road off Highway 367. A woman glimpsed just something weird in the field, and it turned out to be this man's body. He was wearing blue jeans. They actually were very Lee blue jeans. And I'm like, in 1999, it would, of course, been Lee blue jeans. And a white t-shirt. So his clothes were filthy and the body was severely decomposed. Some articles, this was a very small case. You've probably not heard of this case for reasons. And some of the news out there was so ridiculous. But some articles stated that decomposition had led to his fingers falling off, and others said the flesh from his fingers had slid off. So I looked up human decomp, because I'm going to tell you right now, so I don't have to banty about words. His date of death was probably the 27th of June. He was found on the 30th of June. And I'm like, you guys are talking like he'd been out there for fucking weeks. So anyway.
And isn't it worse if they're in the water?
Well, yes. But there's other things, right?
Yes.
And I was like, okay, unless animals pulled his fingers off, his digits would not have come off. Like, your ligaments do not.
In 3 days' time.
No, those don't go away. So an animal could pull them off, but there was nothing about animal predation in any of the articles. 2 days is too short a time for major sloughing of skin.
Okay.
It was June in Missouri, so I thought, well, maybe it was super warm. But it was actually noted in articles the temperatures had been moderate in those days surrounding his death. In normal circumstances, there would have been internal decomposition, but not skin sloughing decomp yet. However, I did find an article that explained that police were puzzled at the level of decomp considering when he'd last been seen. Okay. And so they thought he had perhaps been kept in the trunk of a car for 3 days, which would have
accelerated it.
Yes, or in like a very hot outbuilding or something like that.
Okay.
So there was accelerated decomp.
Okay.
Like that I was able to confirm. I just don't know about the dramatic.
Okay,
but yeah. So he was identified via his fingerprints. So there had to be enough there. See what I'm saying? Anyway, the body was determined to belong to Ricky McCormick. He was a 41-year-old man who lived 15 miles from the field where he'd been found. Ricky had been to 2 emergency rooms in the last couple weeks. On June 22nd, he'd been at Barnes Jewish Hospital, where he was kept 2 days after reporting chest pain. And he did have chest and lung issues, like established heart issues. On June 25th, he went to Forest Park Hospital because of shortness of breath. They appear to have treated him and discharged him the same day. He wasn't actually kept there. He worked at an Amoco station, often doing odd jobs in addition, and it was the last place he was seen alive on June 27th. So again, that's the day that it's felt he died. He had just stopped in briefly, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. He was unmarried, but did have a girlfriend at the time. He'd spoken to her the night before his death, but hadn't seen her in person, so they did not live together, which is how a man could be missing for a few days, right? He had 4 children and partially lived on disability. Interestingly, he was unable to drive and didn't have a car or license. It was unknown how he'd even gotten to the field, as it wasn't near his work or home or on a bus route or any sort of public transit, other than, say, taxi. And he didn't have money.
Yeah.
Like, this was a man who didn't have a bunch of money. And again, he had known heart problems, so it didn't make sense that he would have walked 15 miles.
Just to lay down and die in a field.
Right.
If he was going to walk a long distance, it would have been toward the hospital.
Right. So another fact about Ricky that will be important later, because otherwise it wouldn't be worth mentioning, was that he was mostly illiterate. His family said he could only really write his name, and he couldn't really read. Though they had felt he might have a learning disability, they never had him tested, and he'd ended up dropping out of school. Feel like there was some drop balls there, but I imagine theirs was also a life of poverty, so
yes,
I don't get to judge it. Police had trouble determining whether this was death of natural causes or murder. His known heart problems and the fact that he hadn't been reported missing indicated some sort of natural cause. The fact that he was in an area far from his house with no indication of how he'd gotten there seemed to indicate a body dump. The medical examiner didn't help, declaring his cause of death undetermined. Couldn't figure it out. There were a couple articles that said it seemed like he might have a head injury, but that it couldn't be confirmed because of the level of decomposition. And I'm like, what though? So I don't know. And again, since this isn't like a big popular, everybody knows it case, there's going to be less information online.
And was this one of those counties where the medical examiner is elected? And
I don't know.
They
didn't complain about him, and they didn't say he'd fallen down on the job.
Because I'm going to talk next week about some medical examiners.
Got you.
Not in a flattering light.
I should have been a medical examiner. Then I would get to cut people and do forensic stuff.
Yeah.
Would have been perfect.
And you get to play with dead bodies all day.
Right. And then I could sit there at night on the shift and write when I didn't have some bodies. Anyway, in speaking to others, no one felt there was anyone who'd want to murder Ricky, which then I disagree with later. He did have a history of misdemeanors and had served 11 years in prison for statutory rape. Sorry, 11 months. 11 months of a 3-year sentence for statutory rape.
Okay.
And it was statutory rape. Because I'm always a little, if they just say somebody has statutory rape charge, because you're like, were they just an older teenager than what I mean? Because some states it's so different, and you're like, I need more information. He had started a relationship with a 14-year-old.
Oh, how old was he when he was?
When he started that relationship, it was like 39 or something.
Oh.
Yeah, so he was a full-ass adult. So 2 of his 4 kids were with that 14-year-old. He earned statutory rape. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The official announcement was death by natural causes, ultimately. Police officers on the case, though, they felt like it was a homicide, but there was absolutely nothing proving it was a homicide. So they kind of kept looking into it, but they had to make that official announcement. And they had to go with the medical examiner. His girlfriend and mom both said he seemed nervous in his last days. His girlfriend reported that he had taken a bus to Orlando, Florida. With further prodding, it turned out he'd probably gone there to traffic marijuana for his gas station boss's brother, Baha Hamdallah. In addition...
Sorry.
Yeah, that is the name.
What was it again?
Baha Hamdallah.
Okay.
In addition, there was a drug dealer living in the same neighborhood as Ricky who was suspected of 4 murders, but it couldn't be proven. Gregory Knox was known as a violent man. Some articles reported ties between the two, though not what they were. So I was like, did they? If Ricky was...
Small town, everybody knows everybody. So...
Yeah. If Ricky was running drugs for one person, he might be doing so for another. Or word would have gotten to Knox that Ricky was working for a competitor, maybe, the gas station guy. At one point, a police informant said Knox had admitted to killing a gas station attendant to him. No proof was found pointing to either man, and eventually the case went cold due to the stark lack of evidence. There was just nothing. But it turns out there had been a secret that was never passed along to the public. 12 years later, on March 29th, 2011, the FBI announced it was a murder case. It is on their website as a murder case in a body dump. They also provided 2 pieces of paper that had been in his jeans pocket that appeared to have some sort of cipher. These 2 small slips of paper were... It's letters and numbers and punctuation, and there's even an apostrophe on one, so clearly it's meant to be some sort of conjunction.
Wow.
So the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, known as CRRU, because I'm not going to keep saying that, had been working on the cipher with the assistance of the American Cryptogram Association, and nobody could break that cipher, yet they had like a 99% success rate with cracking codes and ciphers.
Wow.
Do a search on McCormick's cipher, and there are a ton of cipher and code cracking sites that have tried to figure out the information in the ciphers. You can see all the interesting things they're doing with it. Nobody has cracked it. His parents addressed the ciphers by stating that he had been writing notes to himself since he was a young boy, and it had been posited by web sleuths that perhaps it's so hard to break because Ricky had undiagnosed dyslexia.
Okay.
Isn't that fascinating, though? To me, it is fascinating that, because I know it's like this, it's this jumble, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, if he was able to write in a way that he could understand and something like that, that would be fascinating. But
yes.
There are some repeating sequences and patterns, and that's been pointed out by the experts. Like, there is clearly some sort of sequencing and patterning happening. It's
random jumble,
but none of them point to a clear cipher. And so it's interesting. This is like number 3 for the FBI in Unbreakable Code. Number 1 is the Zodiac Killer's cipher.
Ooh.
And the second one is one that it was a threat sent in, and they've never been able to decipher the code. So not much good to send that in.
Yeah, that's an effective threat if nobody can read it.
The FBI believes the pieces of paper could lead them to whoever killed Ricky, or at least to his last movements. Were they people he'd visited on a drug run? Was he a courier and these were instructions? Or were they simply notes he made to himself in a language he'd adapted on his own that nobody else knew? Furthermore, were they written by him or someone else? Some articles said his family had looked at the notes and claimed he'd written them and had ciphers or codes his whole life. But in 2012, his mother made a public statement that they had only said he wrote nonsense notes to himself, not anything as intellectual as a cipher, and used, quote, chicken scratch bullshit in reference to his notes. I felt that some of her words were harsh when she was talking about her son who was
chicken
dead.
Scratch bullshit.
Yeah. He was also known to be mentally ill, and once again, there appears to be no official diagnosis.
Of course.
So could it be nonsense? Anyone with information on the cipher or the murder case is asked to contact the CRRU, and I was going to list their information, but it's a long-ass address, y'all, so just look it up on FBI.gov. And any article about it references that so people can find it. Super easy. Now I want to talk about a more famous case involving odd slips of paper found on a dead man. But I like to do the lesser known ones first, which is why I did Ricky first, because obviously the other one's getting more information. Plus, I try to find shit that's not covered by every podcast ever.
Yes.
Our second unidentified male was found on Somerton Park Beach in Glenelg, Australia on December 1st, 1948.
Oh, I've heard about this one.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, because I asked Travis about it too, when he didn't, I bet if I'd gone into detail, he would have known it. The call to the police came in at about 6:30 a.m. They found him lying in the sand, ankles crossed, with his head leaning against the stone seawall. He had dropped an unlit cigarette on his collar, where it still lay. He was wearing brown slacks, a white dress shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, a brown pullover, and it was a knit pullover, and an American tailored double-breasted jacket in gray, as well as socks and clean, polished shoes. A hat was nowhere to be found, though hats were standard for men at that time, nor was a wallet found anywhere on his person. All his clothing labels had been removed, which sounds odd now, but there was war rationing at the time, which meant a lot of people had to buy used clothes, and it was common at the time to remove tags from used clothing, because it was also common to put your name and stuff.
Yes.
Additionally, the following items were found on his person, and again, I have greatly squished this story because there's a lot of information. So there are some little things I left out due to information I'm going to give at the end that I felt were no longer relevant, that I just kind of yeeted out of there. A train ticket from Adelaide, which was 7 miles away from his location, unused, to Henley Beach. A bus ticket, also they thought unused, an aluminum comb from the U.S., gum, a cigarette pack that held cigarettes of a different brand than the pack, and a box of matches. They actually had all the brands on all these, and I was like, I don't care. It was Juicy Fruit gum, you guys, if you really need to know that.
Juicy Fruit.
Juicy Fruit. The pathologist determined at the autopsy that time of death was likely around 2 a.m. There was a lot of damage internally. I mean, they were listing it out, and it was crazy. Not from impacts, though. It wasn't like, he got hit by a car. It wasn't that sort of damage. But what the pathologist thought must be some sort of poison that didn't show up in the bloodstream or wasn't identifiable. They could not find the known poisons when they tested him. But he felt that from this damage, like foam and lacerations in the back of his throat and stuff like that. And it was his liver maybe that was like 3 times the normal size. It was crazy. So a lot of damage. He was in his early to mid 40s, 5'11", gray eyes, red hair with some graying at the temples, and he was in good physical shape. They went really into detail on that as well. I was like, whoa, slow your roll. The pathologist said he had Britisher features. And I'm like, so does that mean it's from England? Or there were also indications that he might be a dancer, including high pronounced calf muscles and wedge-shaped toes that showed that he had probably long worn pointy-toed shoes or dance shoes, right? Ballet shoes specifically. And the calf muscles, they said it would have been the type of muscles you'd have if you did ballet or something. Mm-hmm. But it also could happen if you wore shoes with like a heel on them. Because people who wear high heels are actually, their calf muscles are different. It's not great for them, which, to the shock of nobody. And his hands didn't show evidence of any hard labor.
Okay.
That was a nice way to say he had girly hands. No, just kidding. But he had nothing that showed that he was a laborer. He'd eaten a pasty about 4 hours before he died, so that would be like 10 p.m. Like, where the hell do you get food at 10 p.m.? You must have had it on him. It did not appear to be poisoned. It was still in his stomach. Witnesses believe they'd seen the man lying in that same spot as early as 7 p.m. the evening before, and some had seen him move, but it was like, they said that he kind of straightened out his arm and then it flopped down. They all figured he was drunk and left him in peace, and they actually commented, so the mosquitoes must have been bad. They were surprised the mosquitoes weren't bothering him. So, months later, a couple would come forward and say they thought they'd seen another man carrying him on his shoulders toward the beach earlier in the evening. This had some added veracity because there was no vomit around the man, which likely would have happened in a case of poisoning. They said the 2 main things you see with poisoning are vomit and convulsions. And so they did say maybe that arm flop had been final convulsions that they saw. But it was like 7 p.m. Those people specifically saw that movement at around 7 p.m. And if his death was at 2 a.m., I don't know.
I'm getting Weekend at Bernie's vibes.
Right? It made sense that it occurred elsewhere and been moved. It also explained his clean, shiny shoes, considering that he had supposedly been walking around all day then from the train station, and yet his shoes still looked clean and polished. No matching dental records or fingerprints could be found for him. The police had him they even went to other countries, other English-speaking countries. The police had him embalmed, a first for a situation like this, on the 10th of that month. The body was re-examined in June 1949 by a coroner, so they embalmed him but kept him where they could get to him, I guess. And the information I've given is again, compacted. It's information gleaned from both examinations instead of breaking those apart. Neither examination had a definitive determination of the cause of death. Both men felt it was an undetectable poison. The second one said it was likely a glucosoid or digitalis. I have heard of digitalis.
It was eye drops.
Did they exist then?
No, but
they both felt the poison had been administered intentionally, but they didn't know if it was suicide or murder then.
Okay. No, that's...
Because, he's chilling. He's all chilled out. But just over a year after the discovery of the man's body on January 14th, 1949, police were given a suitcase that had been left at the Adelaide train station cloakroom. The suitcase was brown and the label had been removed. Just as with Somerton Man's clothing. The suitcase had been checked into the cloakroom on November 30th, 1948, and so that was the day before he was found. Inside the suitcase were various items of clothing, slippers, stationery, pencils, a shaving kit, an electrician screwdriver. That's important, so I put it in there. A stenciling brush, and it was the type of brush given to third officers on merchant ships. Thread that was not available in Australia and matched thread used to repair his trousers he was wearing. A regular table knife that had been sharpened, and a pair of sharpened scissors similar to those used by seamen. Oddly, all the expected clothing was in the suitcase, including a nightshirt, but there were no spare socks. And so they were like, that means something. And I was like, or he was a dude and he forgot to pack socks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's going to wash them in the sink and rewear those puppies, or he's going to buy some new ones. Like, that one, I'm like...
We've all forgotten.
I don't think that points to him being a psycho with a sock problem.
The sockless psycho.
That's right. Even though the tags had been removed from all the clothes, the name Keane, Keane, was found written on 3 items of clothing. One had the first initial T, so it said T. Keane, and then one just said Keane without an E on the end. Police contacted authorities again in countries they felt he might have come from, so English-speaking countries, but there were no reports of a man missing with the name T. Keane. There were also dry cleaning marks on a couple of the clothing items, but they could not locate a dry cleaner that used those particular marks. Using the time of his cloakroom check-in at 11 a.m., police were able to determine he most likely arrived on a train from Port Augusta, Sydney, or Melbourne. During the second examination of the body, a hidden pocket was found sewed shut. Inside that tiny pocket was a small piece of paper rolled up that had the words Tamam Shud on it. Experts from the local library determined it was from the last page of the book Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and was Persian for, they kept saying ending, finish, and I was like, so the end? Jesus Christ. There's so much stuff on him, and they repeat the same stuff over and copy it, and I'm like, you guys, it means the end. Stop it. Police went to the press, and lo and behold, the book it had been torn out of was located in Glenelg, where he was, which is where, that's where he'd been found.
Okay.
So they were
Gasp! The book was there?
But he had just arrived there on a train. Oh. See? So that indicates this is not his first visit, basically. So it is. It is! All right. I can't believe they found it. Like, somebody was like, I have it right here. It had been found possibly in the back of a vehicle in the city in which Somerton Man had been found at some point around the man's death. There's a dispute as to whether it was before or after his death, and some believe it was found before, indicating he had visited the area before, and they already had that book, and he had that paper for a period of time. It was a rare version from New Zealand, and had imprints from writing in it, which they were able to translate onto another piece of paper, and it appeared to be a code. The code consists of only letters, no numbers or punctuation, and one line is crossed out. Despite getting help from various experts, no one has been able to crack the code. It's considered too short. Because the one that I'll post pictures of both codes from McCormick and from this guy, and you will see, like, McCormick's it's 2 pages of stuff. And this one is like, boop, 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 like 4 or 5 lines. So I couldn't see how you wouldn't be able to work out.
There's not enough to establish patterns. Gotcha.
In addition to the code, there was a phone number. That phone number belonged to a woman living in Glenelg named Jessica Thompson. When police questioned her, she said she didn't know him, but that a man had inquired after her when she wasn't home when this man was supposed to have been there, and he had spoken to a neighbor. Police felt she was being cagey, but had no way to compel her to speak. She hasn't committed a crime. You can't force her. Her daughter, after her mom's death in 2007, said she'd always gotten the feeling her mom knew who he was and wasn't willing to say how. Her mom also, she went into a whole thing on 60 Minutes. Her mom could speak Russian and she could read Russian and all this stuff. And so she thought, but her mom wouldn't tell her, how she knew these. When shown a plaster cast of the man's face, she blanched and looked like she was going to pass out, but still said she didn't recognize him. But
she blanched.
Actually, here's the funny thing. I put that word in there because they did 2 long descriptors of what she did, and I was all, she blanched. I'm editing you. She had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat while serving as a military nurse, but had given it to another man. Police tracked him down and found he was still alive, so it wasn't Somerset Man, and he still had the book in his possession, intact. The word's still there. There have been many theories about the Somerton Man, including many false identifications that people were, I know who he is, and they were disproven every time. Suspicion that he was some sort of spy, of course, it was the 1940s. However, July 27th, 2022, Professor Derek Abbott of the University, I said it this past summer, Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide said he'd identified him using DNA that had been extracted from hair. So they had made that plaster cast, some of his hair got stuck in there. Because they did exhume the body at one point. And it had been embalmed and been buried for so long that they really couldn't get good genetic material, but that hair, they finally could. And so they got their hands on that. It matched a man named Carl Charles Webb. This was confirmed by testing living relatives. Webb was an electrical engineer. That's why, because I put screwdriver first, and I found this then, and I was all, I'm going to put that it was an electrician's screwdriver in there, who had lived in Melbourne and was 43 years old then at the time of his death. And they had said 40 to 45. Okay. He was known to be suicidal and had once tried to kill himself, but his wife with poison, but his wife had intervened, and he hated her for it. He also wrote poetry about death. Their marriage had been volatile, with him suffering from rage issues and what was likely depression. He was both physically and emotionally abusive. He left his wife in April 1947, just disappeared. This is 2 years before the body was found. And she later got a divorce due to abandonment. And little did she know, because that was in 1951 it was granted, I think. He was already dead.
Oh my God.
She never heard from him again. It's believed he was searching for her, and having failed, he killed himself because apparently where he died was 1,300 feet from an old house she'd lived in.
Oh.
Interestingly, there's also a Keene connection. Remember the name written on the shirt. Carl's brother-in-law was named Thomas Gerald Keene, and he had lived in the U.S., so they felt the clothes were hand-me-downs from his brother-in-law. And because his jacket had been American-made, his comb was American, there were some other mixes like that. So Carl Webb had lost 4 family members in a 7-year frame, and it's felt that on top of the issues that already existed with his mental health, he had hit this downward spiral, went and looked for his wife, couldn't find her, finished it off. As for the code, it's now thought it had to do with betting on horse races because he was a known gambler. Police have not yet confirmed, to be clear, this identification of him, but it sounds probable, and even they have acknowledged that it's promising, and they're hoping that this finally closes out the notorious case of the Tamam Shud and Somerton man. No death record for Webb has ever been found.
Wow. Because I've heard about the Somerton man. And I've never seen anything about a resolution.
Right? I was going to do it anyway because of the paper. And then I start looking into it, and I find this article, and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God, they might have solved it finally. It's fantastic. Nice. Okay, my sources. For story 1, we're Medium, FBI.gov, The Lineup, CipherMysteries.com, Morbidology, KMOV4 St. Louis News, and Aftermath.com was where I went for the decomp information. Sources for story 2 were Wikipedia, and Historic Mysteries, and Mysteries Unsolved.
Wow. That was quite interesting.
It was exciting.
It was. It was very exciting. So I'm this week I am leaning into the mayhem, leaning in hard. So, because who knows where season 5 is going to go. But you can know I'm going to always look for the humor in the horrible. I was quite proud of that the humor in the horrible. The mirth in the mysteries. I was really tired when I wrote this.
Roll. Keep going. The masturbatory and the mayhem.
I hope that's not what people are doing when they listen to this.
You know, there's always someone.
And someone we know just spit her water on her computer screen. You're welcome. So when our friend, who is also a brilliant writer and editor, Deanna, mentioned the 40 elephants on her Facebook page, I knew I had to talk about them on the podcast. I even responded to her, that sounds like some fine mayhem to me.
And that's Deanna Knipling, if anybody wants to look up her books.
Yes. So the 40 Elephants were an all-woman gang operating out of the Elephant and Castle area of South London. The first mention of the gang in the press is 1873, but there's speculation that they existed well before that. And they were still active into the 1990s.
Wow.
Yeah, these bitches had goals. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they still had descendants today involved in criminal activity, but that is pure speculation on my part. They reached their pinnacle of power and influence in that golden space between the two world wars. The women were initially allied with the Elephant and Castle Mob, which was a London street gang. And I am such a sorry person. I laughed at the idea of these women as the mob's ladies auxiliary. I would just, I don't know. But the women said, fuck the mob, and struck out on their own because that way they could control their own lives and their own money. Now, they did still pay a cut. The gang was so successful, the gang of women, the 40 Elephants, was so successful that many of the members had husbands who were men of leisure, with no jobs of their own. Other husbands were in prison, but, still not contributing to the household. That's kept men.
In multiple ways.
Yeah. Yes. You don't have to worry about where they are if you're keeping them in the jail.
Indeed, you do not.
So, the 40 Elephants had a clever scheme, I thought. They dressed up. I mean, they wore expensive clothing. They wore the jewels. They wore the hats, the gloves, the furs, the shoes, everything expensive. And they shopped at the most expensive shops in London. They would arrive in hired cars, like nice, fancy hired cars. Except their clothing had been altered. And then in all caps, I've written, they had pockets. But they had
Deep
pockets. They did. They had pockets sewn into the linings of their coats and their skirts. So they stuffed the stolen goods into their pockets, into their coats, into their muffs, by which I mean the little thing you stuck
You don't mean prison purse.
I don't mean prison purse. And somebody just spit
A type
more
of
water.
clothing.
Yes, and it was actually mentioned at one point that stood out because it was like a spring day and very warm. And a muff is something you wear in the winter and you stick your hands in it to keep them warm. I'm going to stop using that word now. They're bloomers.
I know it keeps me warm.
And their hats. This is where the stolen goods went.
Okay.
Stop. Now I'm like, where the fuck was I? Okay, so how did they get away with this? In the late 1800s, female customers were afforded an excessive amount of privacy while they shopped.
Ah.
Because you couldn't, oh my goodness, you didn't want to see a
Don't
flash
ogle.
of ankle.
Right? Sexy ankles.
Yes. There was no such thing as a bra fitter back then. You know, there wasn't anybody in there hoiking you into your clothes and moving stuff around. Have you ever had a professional bra fitting? It's unnerving. It's unnerving to say the least.
Well, that's exactly, I'm like, that's a lot of physical contact and an uncomfortable context for me.
Because there doesn't have to be a lot of physical contact, but some bra fitters think they need to rearrange the girls inside the bra. And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm good.
I can do that.
I can do that myself. And what's really amazing, when I worked at the consignment store, there were women who came in and expected to get a bra fitting.
This is a used clothing store.
Right?
Bitch, go to Wayne Bryant.
I would chuck a tape measure at them and tell them how to do it. Like, I don't get paid enough to touch you.
Right? And be in a weird small space with you. No.
But we did have an employee who enjoyed doing bra. I don't know why that was her thing. She liked to get women in the proper size bra.
All right. Her personal mission.
Yeah. So anyway, so they had a lot of privacy, so nobody was watching when they were in the dressing rooms and they were looking at stuff. Then they fenced the stolen goods, which went to other shops where the labels were changed and sometimes the items were slightly altered to give them a slightly different appearance. One fence was arrested but couldn't be convicted because she produced highly fictitious ledgers that showed she had legitimately purchased all the items.
Ah.
Like, clever. Uh-huh. She was cooking the books.
It sounds like bling ringy. Bling ring. Bling ring. The bling ring.
So another side note. The women in 40 Elephants prided themselves on never, ever wearing any of the items they stole.
It
just was not done. They wore expensive clothes,
they could not even.
They bought them. It was a thing. You. They bought their
from
own.
hawking the shit they stole. Yes. I'm sorry, but that doesn't. Oh, that's not. I know you don't, but that's not really a thing to be proud of, you guys.
No,
I paid for this with stolen money, yo.
Yeah. Like, so they spent their hard-earned, ill-gotten gains on their wardrobes and on parties and things. So in the early 1900s, the gang was headed by Alice Diamond, who was also called Queen of the 40 Thieves and Diamond Annie.
They could have just named her Alibaba.
Her brother was part of the Elephant and Castle mob, and her younger sister Louisa joined Annie's gang. Alice, now this was kind of interesting. Alice stood 5'9" at that time, when the average man was 5'6".
Wow!
So yeah, she stood out.
She was an Amazon.
She was. Her criminal career officially began at the age of 16, stealing chocolate. So once she became the leader of 40 Elephants, she was known to wear diamond rings on all her fingers as makeshift brass knuckles. Mm-hmm. That's pretty gangster. And I'm like, that must hurt. I don't want to punch somebody with all my rings on. Not that I have 4 diamond rings to put on
all your rings
on my fat.
I've been sitting here just being blinded by all your rings all the time.
Zing, bling, 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 bling. So before Alice, the gang was run by Mary Carr, who was called Polly for some reason, who was instrumental in separating the 40 elements.
Elephants.
The 40 elephants from the male-dominated Elephant and Castle Mob. Although the two organizations did continue to work together, with the women giving the men a cut in return for muscle. So if they needed somebody beat up, they had somebody to go to. This is where I'm going to say this was printed when my cartridge was going, so bear with me. So Alice was responsible for expanding the reach of the gang. So once the police and the expensive stores figured out what they were doing, it became harder and harder to slip in unnoticed. So she expanded their operations across England into smaller towns and seaside towns, thanks to the stellar British railway system.
But you start going to smaller towns, you start opening yourself to being more noticeable. And
well, yes, and oh my God, the train systems in Britain are 10 out of 10 would write again. So they would stash their empty suitcases in railway lockers, then return with the suitcases full of stolen loot. So I don't think they hit the smaller towns with the regularity that they did the big shops in London. She didn't stop with using the trains. They were some of the first people, first gang, to invest in fast cars to both transport their loot and to outrun the police. And they would do things like hand off a full suitcase and take an empty suitcase and drive off, and the police would chase them. And then when they finally caught them and made them stop, it was an empty suitcase. What do you want? They were very...
How rude, officer.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, indeed.
They were smart.
Alice was known for... Oh, yes, for the policies she put into place with the gang. She implemented a code of conduct for her thieves. It was called the Hoisters Code. I was just like, really? That's what you came up with? Mm-hmm. And she also instituted an equitable distribution of their profits. So there was no, you stole
50,000
and you got 10 cents. Mm-hmm. It was much more, I mean, obviously the higher ups were getting more, but it was a much more equitable distribution. The gang was expected to care for the families of any members who were incarcerated. The women were all expected to provide alibis for each other. And she also forbade any theft between members. Mm-hmm. And they pooled their money to pay for lawyers for any member who needed them. She also had very strict rules about who you could date. Not like class rules but you can't date anybody I don't like.
Okay.
Yeah. So the gang did not stop at shoplifting once they perfected their techniques. They started placing women as domestic help in wealthy households. They even went as far as, I thought this was unusual, they faked their references. So they had... Yes, they did. They faked letters of reference. I just thought it was kind of advanced for the time. But it might not have been. That might just be my misperception. They even, once they cased the homes, they would rob them blind, take off. And some of the women would seduce the male head of household into a brief affair, then blackmail him with threats of ruining his reputation.
All right.
So, like I said, they
multifaceted.
Yes. In the 1920s, between the two world wars, this seems like a segue, but it's not. London was fascinated by the so-called bright young things. This was a name given by the press to wealthy young aristocrats and socialites who threw very flamboyant and fancy parties. They spent money wildly. They dressed outrageously. They drank prodigiously. They did drugs, like the Rat Pack and the Brat Pack. They were the bright young things. The press eats that shit up. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it always has, and it always will. Pretty people spending money and acting drunk. Yeah. The segue is the 40 elements. I actually wrote elements. Please delete that. The 40 elements emulated the bright young things. So they started living big lifestyles. They started throwing these extravagant parties. And at the places where they hung out, the restaurants and the pubs where they hung out, they spent lavishly. Mm-hmm. I mean, people love them for them. They just spent money like there was no tomorrow. And the press began to cover them as if they were party girls. And just party girls. when in fact they were just as ruthless as any of the male gangs. 40, I'm looking at this big blank in the middle going, well, I wonder what the fuck that word was. The 40 Elephants were also very territorial. So if other gangs shoplifted in their territory, they had to forfeit a percentage of their take. If they were slow to pay, beatings and kidnappings would result.
Yikes.
Yeah. So when various members of the gang were arrested at one time or another, their sentences tended to be short. I think because they were women.
They were women. They seemed like they seemed upscale. Yes. Even if that was from theft. So that would also count in their favor, I feel like.
And they were pretty, and they were fashionable, and yes. And most of the women, now probably not all, but most of the women tended to go right back into the gang when they were released from jail. One woman, Ada Wellman, was part of the gang when she was arrested in 1921, and she was still active again when she was arrested in 1939.
Wow.
Yeah. One of Alice's rules stipulated who gang members could and couldn't consort with, and in 1925, a member defied Alice and married a man Alice didn't approve of. Alice led an attack on the newlyweds, which was so vicious, it turned into the Lambeth Riot.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's bitchy.
It definitely is. For her rule, Alice was sentenced to 18 months in jail. And by the time she got out, a new queen had taken over, and Alice began a career running a brothel and training new thieves. One of her interns, Shirley Pitts, was the queen of the gang until the 1960s. In fact, the gang officially disbanded when Pitts died in 1992.
Wow.
Yeah. I just thought, I was just friggin' delighted by this. This is absolute mayhem, and I'm all for it. So, my sources are Deanna Knipling, Wikipedia, and Glamour. Glamour magazine, fall of 2019. They did a big article because, of course, there's not a ton, but there are some photographs, and they're all very pretty, and they're all very done up, and they have their hair done and fashionable clothing on, and so
yeah.
But it was just this huge gang
of thieves. All right.
Who didn't take any crap from anybody.
They didn't. Well, they took a lot of crap from people, but they didn't take crap from people.
They took the good stuff, not the crap.
That's right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Yeah, we did all our yakking at the beginning this time.
We did, and we still have to record another episode.
Woohoo!
So save any more yakking. You guys can support us on www.buymeacoffee.com/MMmayhem. I had to be careful with that because I was editing one of the previous ones. I ended up having to take it out because I said buy me a book. Because that's the option that I have on there, but it won't get you anywhere on the internet. And there are tiered levels and one-time support levels, and it just helps us pay for our overhead.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for listening and being here.
Have a good week
for this new season.
We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.